Growth Pod is brought to you by Genero, a leading growth agency in the Nordics. We interview marketing experts, business leaders, and entrepreneurs to uncover the stories and strategies behind profitable growth.
Today's guest is marketing leader Tricia Weener. Tricia served as global CMO for business to business at HSBC, which is one of the world's largest banks. And until very recently, she was the CMO and executive vice president at Kone. Welcome to the show, Tricia.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So I'd love to start just with some background and try to so for instance, what drew you into marketing? What was it? Was it did you always have a passion and interest for it? Or what got you kind of started?
I kind of look back on it and think it sort of found me rather than I went out to find it. So I didn't have a passion for it as a sort of teenager. The one thing that I still remember today was that I always wanted to set up and run my own business. That was this thing at 14 I had very clearly. So I knew that I wanted to be in business. I didn't know kind of what that shape might take. I surprisingly studied maths, physics and chemistry to A-level, which is the sort of highest school exams in the UK, because I was good at those subjects. But they weren't necessarily something that I was really passionate about. And so I went to uni and chose a very generalist degree, business studies. And while I was doing that, in the first year, we had one marketing module. We had economics and psychology and all of the other modules you have in business. And I loved it. And I sort of really started to find a passion for both the sort of psychology of human beings and buying behaviors, but also the sort of impacts that you can create in business through marketing. And then in my second year, I selected a higher number of modules that were marketing related. And I went out to do a year in industry. I was a sponsored undergrad with an engineering company, actually, a company called British Aerospace. And through that year, I was able to go to lots of different functions within the company and did a sales and marketing internship, a sort of 3-month period, and really loved that as well. And then basically decided that I wanted to do the Chartered Institute of Marketing professional qualification and came out of uni and thought, that's what I want to do. I then really struggled to get into the industry proper because aerospace, although they offered me and I went back to work for them straight after uni as a grad, they didn't have what I would consider a sort of proper marketing function. It was more a sort of sales and comms function. And so I really wanted to get into the agency world. And I guess one of the things that I still remember to this day is I had to be so resilient, because you would go for interviews at that point and people would be like, well, you've no experience. And so really, I can't get experience if you won't give me the chance. And that, although I had some, pockets of experience on my CV, that's something that I really had to sort of double down on. And an opportunity came through my network in the end to go and work at an agency. And it was a boutique agency in London. They were quite strong strategically, which was something that I was really interested in. So although I enjoyed kind of promotional marketing and some of the more creative, I guess, sides of marketing, I was also always very interested in much more in the sort of strategic side.
Got it. And what made you then want to switch from the agency side to the client side? Was that just a good opportunity came up, or a deliberate decision?
I don't know whether there is a podcast called Squiggly Careers, which I love, and my career I always describe as being a squiggly career. It was perhaps not as well planned as it might have been, but it's been brilliant, and I've really enjoyed the fact that I've kind of allowed it to flow. And actually, the reason that I went client side is that one of my clients when I worked at the marketing partnership was a very large airport retailer and airport services company called Alpha Airports Group. And I was doing a lot of work for them in the agency. They were one of my biggest clients. And they had an opening at a senior marketing manager level. And they approached me and I got the job. So I actually went client side as a result of somebody approaching me for the role. And actually at that point, thoroughly enjoyed client side work. I was there for about 18 months. And maybe just going back to that point that I mentioned earlier, I'd always wanted to run my own business.
Right.
I had set up a business at uni, but decided that I wanted to get some experience before I actually did it proper. And after 18 months at Alpha, I got a call from the guy that ran the agency that I had left. Okay. And he said, hey, I'm looking to bring in a new partner, and I'm happy to allocate shareholding. Would you be interested? And ultimately, I want to exit the company in sort of 4 to 5 years. And so for me at that point, I thought, this is fantastic. It's a very, I guess I wouldn't say completely risk-free, but it was a very effective way. I was offered 25% shareholding in the company. I was then obviously given this trajectory to go from client services partner through MD and then ultimately to become CEO of the company. Right. And so it was a great opportunity to really run a business. It was still a relatively small business, but we doubled it in size twice in the time that I was there, and brought on a lot of new clients. And I can tell the story of why I then left and set up on my own, because maybe that's also relevant. So that I thoroughly enjoyed and always had actually the breadth of work that you got when you were in an agency. And I think that's the difference. You go very deep when you're client side, because you have to understand, the detailed workings of the company and what it takes then to be able to drive growth from a marketing and comms perspective. I think when you're working in an agency, you just had this wonderful opportunity to go cross-sector. And the businesses, even if you're working within a specific sector like retail, you have such variety across the different retailers that you work in. So I really enjoyed that when I was working at Marketing Partnership. And I did progress through the company and got to a point where I was really running the business as MD. And had my first child and went back to work very quickly and continued, and then had my daughter. And at that point, and actually today, in today's world, I don't think it would happen, but I basically had gone back pretty much full time after 4 months. I was working crazily as you do when you're working in a medium-sized business. And I said, look, I would be really appreciative if I could do 4 days in the office. I was working in London. It was a sort of 45 to an hour commute. And I'd love it if I could just work from home 1 day, because it means that I can actually just have. And it wasn't supported. And I just thought, do you know what? I actually think I can do this for myself now. I was just 30. I had some great client contacts. And so I, within 6 weeks, exited the business, set up my own company, Intelligent Marketing. And we started actually with a team of 10 people. Okay. So it was quite a risk from my side. I knew that there were certain clients that were interested in working with us, but there were no guarantees, obviously, starting out. And we doubled the business from year 1 to 2. So we did over £1 million pounds. So I guess about 1.3 million euros first year. We were very profitable, and it was fantastic. I mean, I didn't look back. Did that for I think 7.5 years. Okay, wow.
And would you say, because one thing that I kind of wanted to ask you then, relating to your career at HSBC, which you're able to climb through the ranks very quickly, and kind of what were some of the skills that allowed you to progress so quickly in all these roles? And for instance, would you say that experience of being on the business side and having to actually run your own business, you have to manage everything from HR to sales to obviously service delivery. Do you think that made a big impact and it kind of contributed to your skill set, as opposed to someone who maybe just goes through working purely marketing agency or client side?
Yeah, I think the commercial understanding that I gained running my own business was a very pivotal reason for my ability to be able to grow within HSBC. I think the other thing for me, actually, which was very helpful, is I was on the business to business side at HSBC. So I ultimately was global CMO, as you mentioned, for business to business. So one of the things, I was already a client of HSBC. So I knew what it was like to be a business banking customer. And actually, then when I went into market HSBC from a business banking perspective, I knew where the pitfalls were. Right. So I've always been a great believer, you need to be customer centric to be a really good marketer. You have to understand all facets of the customer journey, but you don't have to be a customer. So this was beneficial that I had been a customer, but I also think it's perfectly possible for me, as I have done in the past, to market Guinness, right? I don't have to be I don't mind Guinness, but it wouldn't be my drink of choice. Right. So I think what you've got to be able to do is put yourself into the position of the customer and really double down on the insight that you can get on actually the drivers of customer behavior. Yeah. So I think that was a big advantage when I first went into HSBC, is I had actually been in that position from a business banking perspective. Clearly, I was also looking after corporate banking, also ultimately then looked after multinationals and what we called our global banking and markets business. That was an area that I was not as familiar with. So I still had to build out my knowledge. So I think the one thing that I would say, in addition to being very customer centric, is curiosity, like really wanting to and being interested in the business that you are running and understanding commercially the drivers of that business so that you can then strategically guide the organization. Because actually, if all you are doing is looking specifically at marketing activities, then you're not going to be able to have that dialogue at a board meeting or in any environment where you will be credible in trying to justify investments, because you can't demonstrate the value in terms of what you're doing.
Would you say that those kind of 3 C's, commercial, understanding, customer centricity, and curiosity, are rare among marketers, and they tend to focus more on just the marketing itself?
I think it depends. I mean, I my 3 C's actually are creativity, curiosity, and commerciality. Right. I'm a big believer in the power of 3, so I quite like that. But I would add customer onto that. But that's for me is just it's a requirement if you are going to be in marketing and comms. You just have to be customer centric. But I think those 3 things are not always evident in all marketers. I think you can perhaps overweight in one area versus another. But actually, what I see least of in those 3 C's is commerciality.
Interesting. Can you talk about
that for me is the most important, and it's becoming more and more important. I think in reality, marketing historically has been let off quite a lot around actually the value that is being generated from the investments that are being sought. And that has often been because there isn't a way of being able to demonstrate the value, or we can't get the data from the sales guys or girls, the sales teams. But actually, it's perfectly possible, as we all know in today's world, and not just using digital media. I think, digitization has helped because it does enable performance marketing to actually demonstrate the value that's being created. But actually, you can do it at a much wider level, including brand. The brand metrics are very available, but you just need to put the right things in place to be able to get all of the data out, to be able to justify the spend. So that is a marketing lens in which you need to be more commercial. But I think you also need to be able to speak the language of your business and your business colleagues. And I think this has been a learning for me along the way, particularly in the last role that I've done in an industry that I was not familiar with before I started, of course, every industry has its own language. Every industry has its own abbreviations, too many of them. And that was the same in financial services. But I think in coming to Kone, what was very interesting is Kone has a language all of its own, even in relation to sort of their profit and loss and how. So you need to be able to really understand how the business makes money, what the key objectives are, what the drivers of growth are going to be, but not just the drivers of growth in relation to sales, but actually from a profitability perspective. Because I think as marketers, we can often get carried away with sales growth, not understanding that actually we need to focus on specific segments that are more profitable than other segments. So that deep understanding of the commercial drivers enables you to be a better marketer, because you can then set the right objectives globally that then drive that growth in the right places.
Right. And do you think that deep understanding, can you learn it just by picking up a book and Googling what EBITDA means? Or do you actually have to go through and get that hands-on experience that you got running your own business? Like, let's say young or not even young marketer listening to this and thinking, I don't have this commercial understanding, and clearly it's key to success. How would I go about even acquiring that kind of knowledge?
I think there's lots of different ways in which you can do it without necessarily running your own business. For me, and I'm a big believer in development plans. So actually every year I sit down and I think about like what it is I want to achieve in the year. And I've been very purposeful about that. So that for me probably is the first thing, is if you want to develop commercially, then make sure it is a high priority on your list, because otherwise there are always going to be other priorities. Yeah. You can do it very easily still working within a marketing function, but perhaps you need a mentor or somebody within the organization who you can go and shadow. You might choose to do something to actually align with somebody in finance, or make a choice within your marketing career to go and do something in the planning and ops function for a period, so that you can really understand the financials of the function. And then you automatically have to connect with colleagues in finance and in the business to be able to make sure that you can do your role effectively. So the other thing is to actually look at moving into a sales role or moving into a commercial role within the company that you're working in, even for just a short period. It might be that marketing is your passion, but actually there's nothing wrong with doing an 18-month or a 2-year. And I think that actually builds your credibility, but it also then builds your commerciality and your ability to be able to be more successful in perhaps your chosen career of marketing.
I really like that, because I feel like that's something that's gone unnoticed. That kind of just very pragmatic long-term view of like, let's do 18 months here so I can pick up this skill set and this experience and then come back to what I really want to do. But I feel like people maybe in younger generations or younger people, they are so focused on each step needs to be further along the line. You're so afraid of like going backward or seem to be going backward. So you're not able to make those investments are really good long-term with a good long-term payoff.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think your career is never linear. I don't think it should be. I describe mine as squiggly, but actually I don't think there is anything wrong with stepping to the side for a period. And actually, if I had my time again, and this is something that I didn't do early enough in my career at HSBC, I should have gone into a risk function for a period, which is like as far away for me as in terms of anything that I would ever perhaps want to do for a long-term career, but it would have enabled me to get into business leadership, not just perhaps marketing leadership, but actually business leadership roles at HSBC, which it's not impossible to still do it, but if you haven't got that risk understanding, it's very difficult to then be going out and lending money, as you can imagine. So I think understanding the things that perhaps drivers of success for you, but not leaving it too late, and not being afraid to take a sideways step, or sometimes even to go and do something that might put you out of your comfort zone and be very different, and mightn't be with a very specific future end goal in mind, but just go do it for a period and see if it works.
Yeah, and I feel like especially with the world changing so quickly, and it's so hard, it's impossible to predict the future, or even our own future, or how we're going to develop and what things we'll find interesting. It seems really foolish to kind of have this very specific goal as opposed to just jumping on opportunities as they kind of come up.
Yeah.
Speaking of squiggly careers, the jump from HSBC banking in Hong Kong to elevators in Finland, what was that like? It was hard. Yeah. What was the hard? The culture, or?
No, the culture was fantastic. I have to say the culture at Kone is amazing, and I always felt very sort of welcomed from the minute that I arrived. I think I hadn't fully anticipated just the scale of change, and I'd been at HSBC for 11 years. I had moved about every 18 months into new roles. So I'd changed my role a lot and changed country. But I think the constant was the organization and understanding financial services. So when I then moved to Finland, I always describe it, I changed company, I changed industry, and I changed country. And I would never have thought of Finland as a place that I would work. It was about as far away from my sort of consciousness as it could have been. So when we then came here, I knew a little bit about the culture, but I hadn't visited Finland at all before I started going through this process to start at Kone. So we'd visited just for a weekend, but we then moved in the middle of COVID in January. And arrived and actually couldn't leave the apartment for 3 days because we had to be quarantined for 3 days. So I think COVID added an even more complex layer to starting, because for the first 6 months we were fortunate at Kone in that I could still go into head office. So we had a 50% rule in terms of only 50% of people could be in the office in that period. But I was able to at least meet most of my colleagues from the executive board. I was able to meet my team. So that was helpful, but I couldn't travel. Kone operates in 60 plus countries. So the fact that you are sort of stuck in a head office, you're doing a global role in head office, but you actually can't get out to meet anybody, whether that's customers, technicians, team, that was something that was quite limiting. And it wasn't until I think it was September, October, that I was then able to get out and about. So, a new industry is hard. It just takes time. And I think, as I was saying before, the understanding the language of that industry, the different facets of the business. This is a complex, large organization. And so you have to be able to take the time both to understand the products, the solutions, the different customer types, actually how the businesses run in large countries versus small countries. So there is a huge amount of learning. And I would say it was enjoyable, but it was exhausting. And alongside that, you're also having to understand how to navigate a completely different organization of scale. And China is, was the biggest business. And actually, I didn't even get to China in my plus 2.5 years at Kone because of COVID. So you could only start traveling again to China early this year, sort of February, March time. And even then it was quite complicated because there were hardly any flights. So, there were, sort of throughout the time I was there were still some things, whether that was COVID related or whether it was just as a consequence of being new into an organization. You're constantly learning as you go.
You touched upon a couple of things that I think are really interesting, because you are one of the very few people who have actually been working on this kind of global marketing level for these massive marketing leading companies. And so I think for a lot of people, it's kind of like this very mysterious thing that you don't really understand how marketing is done on that level. And so I'd love to kind of a little bit peel back the curtain, or whatever you say. For instance, when you came to Kone, like you said, I mean, so many products, so many different market segments and markets, and different ways of selling and different customers segments, all of those things. How did you go about trying to figure out, well, how should we even do the marketing? Like how can we even come up with a coherent global strategy, or should we even, when it comes to marketing? Because it's so massively complex. How do you even go about such a task?
I think the first thing I did was to spend time just understanding how things worked already, because I think, and we didn't have clarity actually around the full function, and it was marketing and comms. So it was all corporate communications, internal communications, and also supporting with IR. So it was quite considerable in terms of the breadth, and then the variation in terms of maturity across the countries was significant.
Right.
And marketing was not something that had been invested in. We had a very strong corporate comms function, and that was very well understood. I think possibly more because of the internal comms need than perhaps the external comms. That wasn't as mature as perhaps it should have been. So I think this is always really important. I spent time meeting virtually all of our teams from around the world. We did not have, and I was just starting to say this, clarity actually in terms of who was in marketing and comms and who wasn't. So it was down to the level of actually even just understanding as a first point actually who the teams were and where they were and actually what they were doing. And then we also needed to look at the leadership team, because the leadership team was not clearly aligned to how the business was being run. So that was one of the first things that I did, was to really look at the operating model globally, and understand actually how we could support the organization and try to mirror it as best as possible with marketing and comms support at an area level and then at a country level. And I think that then meant once we had the leadership team in place, they were then able to really do a full audit of what we were doing, where we felt that we were, top of our game and we were really market leading, and other areas where we had gaps and we needed to double down and perhaps invest either in different skills and capabilities, or in perhaps some technology and, So that was where we started. And I think in answering your question around how you run a function across an organization of this size, for me, as a global team, you're literally looking to sort of set the ambition, be clear about the purpose, but most importantly, the value that we will bring, because that was the bit that was missing. Marketing and comms was not valued to the extent that I think it should have been. Yeah. And so that was really something. And this is something we got onto perhaps a little bit later than we should have done. But what we did is we went through and we said, actually, what are the key pillars of value that we are driving? And how can we then map KPIs, key performance indicators, against those and ladder that up? So at a group level, when I go into the executive board, I can actually say, this is the value that we are bringing. And I'm delighted we got there.
Got it. And would you say that's kind of typical from just what you've seen in general, is that marketing is not really aligned with the rest of the, let's say, the other functions, or even with the overall corporate strategy or with the management team? And would it take like a leader who understands both marketing and the commercial side to kind of bridge the gap, talk with the CFO and the CEO and get everyone kind of pulling in the same direction?
That is, for me, it's really important that happens. And I think particularly with a very sales-led organization, I think it's even more important because it's not marketing. It should never be marketing for marketing's sake, but I think in some larger organizations, there's more freedom, or there has been historically, for marketing functions to do what they do, and for that not to be so closely connected to sales. I think that's changed. I can't say it's changing. I think that's changed. So there is always a requirement now to be able to show, what the investment, because otherwise the investment can go somewhere else. There's too many priorities at the moment. You said it before, change is so fast. And actually the one thing that won't change is change. It's just going to get faster and faster. So this ability to be quite agile and to understand what is important in the moment. And there has to be, a mix of sort of long-term investments and short-term investments. But for me, the really important thing is that you set that strategy. You are really clear actually directionally where you want to go. But then you can also have the sort of agility through, and we used a quarterly planning and prioritization process. So we would have a 3 to 5 year long-term view. We would have an annual plan, but we would prioritize quarterly, so that if something had changed in that period, or if business colleagues wanted us to refocus, then we were able to do that. And that enabled us to set a framework globally for what we were doing. But, I talk about all of this. It sounds like it was perfect and it was all working. It wasn't. There was still huge amounts of potential to really make that machine work, even more effectively.
Right. But I think you make a really good point, is that even though it is so complex, you have all these different moving parts, if you can just align it back to the business, that's a really good starting point. But you also talked about the importance of long-term versus short-term. And have you found that it's a challenge as a marketer to defend long-term investments? Because we can show some kind of ROI, we can show projections, but ultimately it's going to be based on, well, I have two questions. Number one, how do you go about justifying those investments that you feel are really important in, for instance, brand, and that you know over time will contribute to the company's success? And what do you think about the role of judgment? Just like the marketing leader, someone who spent decades doing something, saying, hey, I know that our brand is weak. I know it because I've talked to a lot of customers. And I know that if we strengthen our brand, our salespeople are going to do a much better job. I can't show you the numbers yet, but I know it's true. So trust my judgment on this. Like, what do you think about those two? Is that?
I think it's really difficult to get that balance right. And the temptation and the way in which marketing functions are driven is much more around performance right now.
Right.
So for me, I think it's really important that as a group CMO, you are fighting rightly for the long term, that it can't be only the long term. Clearly, you need to get the right balance. And the way I have always looked at it is around sort of 60%, ideally 60% on more long term investments, and about 40 on short term. The reality, it's the other way around,
right?
If not even more so.
Yeah.
I think the temptation is always 70, 80% on the sort of performance, because we can see that it's immediate.
Yeah.
And I think particularly in a high change environment, the temptation for everybody is to go for short term wins, because you need to make your quarter. And actually, if business is not, at where it needs to be in one area or market, the temptation is you double down in another and you really push to get sales in that other area. So you are driven much more for short-termist solutions. But yeah. I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that you've got the right balance. Customer metrics as well, I would say, not just brand, but actually you're investing in customer surveys, right, so that you can actually bring the insight to the business, so you can be developing products and solutions for the long term that are actually going to be right and are going to solve problems of the future for customers. But it's a battle, and there are no. I think there's no silver bullet in terms of the metrics that you can use for those longer term investments. There is an element of. I certainly think there are ways in which you can put measurements in place, but they're not really the metrics that the business want, right? Because it's not sales. No. So you can provide what I've always described as sort of marketing metrics that reassure us that it's actually hitting the right audiences, you're getting the right sort of, I guess, coverage that you're looking for. But actually, that's great, but it's not the hard dollars. And so making sure that you've at least got something is better than nothing. Yeah. But then you do really have to fight much harder for those investments. I think I've also been quite lucky in that rarely in my career has the marketing budget been micromanaged by anybody else. I think it's always really important that it's transparent, that you can show exactly what the investments are and why you are making the decisions as a function that you are. Yeah. But actually, I've been fortunate that we've had the freedom then to really guide the business on where we should be investing, and for what reason. So, but if I perhaps then argue it the other way, do I think certainly in recent times we've been able to invest enough in the long term? No. Needed to invest more. But that again is because of the external environment, probably more than anything else.
Got it. And would you say that this is a potentially huge competitive advantage for companies who are able to, because alignment on, let's say, the board level, to invest in long term, like this is a potentially huge opportunity for them?
Yes, I do.
And what do you think about the role of judgment in this age of massive data collection? Everything can be measured, tracked, A/B tested.
I think it still has a place. I think it still has a place. I think you do need to be objective and you do need to use data. But I mean, some of the most creative campaigns and solutions come from nowhere. It's not data that has enabled somebody to create an Uber. Yeah. As an example, or a Netflix. I think clearly creativity plays a big role, and often you don't have the data to go alongside a hunch and an idea. I think you also need bravery. Yeah, I think that's the other thing, is actually sometimes you might have some of the data, but you won't have all of it, and you actually need to be brave. And some of the things that I'm probably most proud of in my career are the moments when we've been really brave and highly creative. And those have created global conversations that have really enabled the brand to stand up and have a point of view.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, gained huge traction.
I think that's really, really interesting, because I've been thinking about the way I see it, the limiting factor in building a great brand is courage. It's not information or knowledge, because everyone has access pretty much to the same data, but it's the person who can actually, or the team who can actually make those courageous bets and think long term. I feel like, and that's why courage is always going to be in short supply. And so great brands are always going to be in short supply. I think there's always an opportunity to build those really great brands. So many things I would love to continue talking about. I think we're almost out of time. So one kind of final question. You've seen a lot of changes in marketing, and you've seen from a global perspective what's happening. Is there any area that makes you particularly excited about any changes, or any kind of any areas that you're paying attention to in terms of just marketing and branding in general?
Probably won't surprise you, but I think AI is the one that sort of scares me and excites me in equal measure.
Right.
And the other is sustainability, because I think we as marketers have a really important role alongside many other colleagues to start to transform organizations so that they are focused on net zero sooner than perhaps we're focused right now. And this is a particular passion of mine. It has been for many, many years. And not just actually in the sort of environmental side, the social part of it, I think, is equally important.
Right.
And social is more important from a brand perspective, not because you're doing it to be able to, I guess, promote it as part of your brand, but you're doing it because it's the right thing to do for local communities, and you're doing it because it's the right thing to do for your company.
Right.
But actually your brand gets a very positive halo effect from doing those things as well. So I would strongly hope that marketing has a voice at the table around ESG and the sorts of things that we should be doing to build new products and solutions and services that are actually more sustainable than the ones that we perhaps have today, and looking at circularity and looking at ways that companies can do things differently. Because ultimately, I don't believe that consumers will create all of the pull. I think they'll create some of it, but I think it's incumbent upon businesses and investors actually to really start to drive this change. And I think marketing does have an important role in that.
Yeah, I think that kind of speaks to a problem that we typically have in Finland, which is Finnish companies do a lot of good work when it comes to quality and sustainability, but it's the actual talking about it and explaining it, which is where we have some improvements to make.
There's potential there, for sure. There are some phenomenal Finnish brands that I only discovered when I came here.
Yeah, for sure. We're well, it's good to frame it as potential. So thank you so much, Tricia, for coming on. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. If people want to follow what you're doing, is LinkedIn the best?
Yeah, I think so. LinkedIn. I'm not great on Twitter or X. No, much better. I'm on LinkedIn and on Instagram as well.
Yeah. Like I said, thank you so much for taking time, and all the best. Best of luck in your future endeavors.
Thank you so much. It's been great. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening. You can find all episodes of The Growth Pod on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts.